Have you ever noticed that the hardest time to hear God's voice is when your own thoughts won't stop talking? That happened to me this morning. I was reading a devotional and one sentence stopped me. It wasn't because I'd never read it before, it was because this morning I realized I hadn't really been listening. I was reading the words, but I was filtering everything through my own concerns. It forced me to ask a simple question. Am I really listening to God, or am I just listening to my own thoughts? By the way, if we haven't met before, I'm Arch Kennedy. My hope is that these conversations will encourage you to keep following Christ, no matter what you're facing. What I realized this morning is something that I think every Christian struggles with at one time or another. We all have things that compete for our attention. We have work, we have responsibilities, we have relationships, we have decisions to make. None of those things are wrong, but they can become so loud that we stop hearing what God is trying to teach us. That's what happened to me. The problem wasn't what I was reading. The problem was my perspective. Instead of simply listening, I was measuring everything against what was already on my mind. Then the Lord reminded me of something that I definitely needed to hear. Before anything else in my life, I needed Him. Not because my responsibilities don't matter, but because if I lose sight of Christ, I'll eventually lose sight of everything else. That led me to another question. What does obedience cost? We talk a lot about following Jesus, but Jesus never hid the cost. He said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. I think sometimes we love the idea of following Jesus, but we don't love the idea of denying ourselves. Every one of us has something we're tempted to hold on to instead of surrendering to Christ. For some people, it's pride. Others, it may be bitterness. For some others, it may be addiction. Maybe it's pornography. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's greed. Maybe it's a relationship that isn't honoring God. The struggle may be different, but the call is the same. Jesus says, follow me. I've been thinking about that all day because I made a fresh commitment this morning. Not because I've arrived, not because I've suddenly become stronger, but because every day I have to answer the same question. Who is going to be Lord of my life today? I think a lot of us are waiting for the day when obedience feels easy. I'm not convinced, though, that's how discipleship works. Most days, obedience is simply saying yes to Christ before our feelings catch up. If I only obey when it's easy, then is it really obedience, or am I just doing what I already wanted to do? Real obedience costs something. That's why Jesus compared discipleship to carrying a cross. Every day we're called to die a little more to ourselves so we can live more fully for Him. The beautiful part is that Jesus never asks us to surrender something without offering something infinitely better. The world tells us that freedom comes from following our hearts. Jesus tells us that freedom comes from following Him. Those are two completely different paths. One path follows our desires wherever they lead. The other leads to life, even when the road is difficult. Maybe you're listening today and you're carrying a burden that nobody else knows about. Maybe you've prayed the same prayer over and over and over again. Maybe you're discouraged because you thought you'd be farther along by now. Let me encourage you with something the Lord reminded me of today. Don't measure your walk with Christ only by whether the struggle has disappeared. Measure it by who you're following today. Temptation is not the same thing as surrender. The presence of temptation doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. It means you're still learning to walk faithfully in a fallen world. Victory isn't always dramatic. Sometimes victory is one quiet decision to obey God when nobody else is watching. Sometimes it's choosing integrity when compromise would be easier. Sometimes it's choosing forgiveness when your flesh just wants nothing but revenge. Sometimes it's simply saying, Lord, I don't feel strong today, but I'm going to trust you anyway. Those moments may never make headlines, but they're precious to God. He's far more concerned with our faithfulness than our image. That's something I'm still learning. The Christian life isn't about pretending we've arrived. It's about continuing to follow Jesus, one decision at a time, one day at a time. So if you're carrying something heavy today, don't wait until you feel stronger before you choose Christ. Choose Him today. Then wake up tomorrow and choose Him again. That's what discipleship looks like. It's not perfect people, it's forgiven people learning to trust a perfect Savior. Following Jesus is costly, but He's definitely worth it. If this conversation encouraged you, I'd love you to subscribe here on YouTube or follow wherever you listen. And if you know someone who needs this kind of encouragement today, share it with them. Until next time, keep finding freedom through obedience to Christ.